Welcome to the Duckpin Podcast with your host, Brian Griffiths. And now, here's Brian.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another new episode of the Duckpin Podcast. I am your host, Brian Griffiths. I'm really excited that we're going to have my good friend, Rory McShane, who's a major political consultant from Las Vegas, joining us on this week's episode of the show. We're going to talk about the nuts and bolts of what it's like to be somebody in the consulting business. You're not going to want to miss this. Stay tuned. Up next, Rory McShane here on the Duckpin Podcast. Our guest on this week's episode of the Duckpin Podcast is somebody that I have known for a long time. He's been a good friend for a long time. He started out with us in Maryland, involved in local politics, and now he is a highly successful political consultant based out of Las Vegas. My good friend, Rory McShane. Rory, thanks for being a guest on the show this week.
Brian, always a pleasure to be with you. Always enjoy getting to work with you on anything that you do. Thank you for having me on.
No, I appreciate having you on this show. So let's talk a little bit background. Talk about, obviously I know your background. I've known you for a long time. So tell folks who may not know who you are, how you wound up, your upbringing in politics, your upbringing, and how you got to be a political consultant who has hung out their own shingle and opened their own successful firm.
Sure. There is a very sad day in every high school football player's life, or not everyone, but most of our lives, when we realize that the NFL is not happening. And at, all of 5 foot and 10 inches tall, I realized that the NFL was not in the cards for me. And, I was going to have to find some other way to be paid to be aggressive. And I've loved politics my entire life. I remember, so really, if we want to go really back here, my parents were not together. My parents were divorced. And so I used to have these long rides in the car with my dad to his house and then back to school and stuff like that. And he had this old car that did not have FM radio. It only had AM radio. So it picked up Rush, so it would pick up, Rush Limbaugh and stuff like that. And we'd start talking about politics on these long drives. And my parents were both conservatives, and I just became fascinated with it. And I got involved in young Republicans and teenage Republicans. And, I only went to college for about 3.5 hours, so I was never really involved in college Republicans. I kind of did that until somebody offered to hire me on a campaign. And my first campaign paid me $500 a month. My second campaign paid me $1,000 a month. I got a really stiff raise there, so that was good. I'm a big believer that professional politics for the most part is a meritocracy, right? And I was able to kind of work my way up. A decade ago, I worked on a handful of races in Maryland as a young guy, and several of them were successful. And I got an offer to go manage a state Senate race in Virginia. And from there came an offer to work on a congressional race. And from there came an offer to go out to Colorado and work for the RNC for a little bit. And from there, I managed a governor's race. That would have been 6 years ago. That was the last race I personally managed as the full-time campaign manager, day-to-day staffer, managed. I went to Indiana. I was the finance director of their Republican Party there. I did a special election in Texas, and then I got hired by a firm, Red Rock Strategies, which at the time was kind of the powerhouse firm of the southwestern U.S. and got to have some really great experiences there, learn a lot there. While I was there, we won the most Democratic congressional seat to be won by a Republican in the western United States in the last decade, Nevada's 4th District. Got to work on Joe Heck's U.S. Senate race, a lot of cool stuff. From there, I was recruited to go to Harris Media to be the number 2 guy at Harris Media, worked for Vincent Harris. And again, had a lot of great stuff there. Worked on Ralph Norman, South Carolina 5, won the runoff by 279 votes. It was the closest congressional race that year. Worked on Corey Stewart's governor's race. That was a huge shockwave to the political establishment, what we were able to do there. And then about a little over 3 years ago, I started my own firm. We're based both here in Las Vegas. This is our main office where the majority of our staff works, in Washington, D.C. And actually, until COVID, I was splitting my time between Washington and Las Vegas. And we've had a lot of fun. We've gotten to do a lot of great stuff. We're part of over 20 general election victories in 2018. So far this cycle in 2020, we've won or been a part of 22 winning campaigns in their Republican primaries. So we've had a lot of fun. Gotten some very cool awards from Campaigns and Elections Magazine, the American Association of Political Consultants, and really having a great time, and wouldn't trade it for anything.
Yeah, I can't undersell the importance of those awards. I mean, Campaigns and Elections, for people who don't know, that is the periodical for people who work in campaigns and elections. Obviously, I mean that is a big deal. Ron Fauché, who was one of the founders of that magazine, was one of my professors back at GW, and the American Association of Political Consultants. You win one of those awards, it's like winning the Emmy, and that just shows to how successful Rory has been at a young age too. I mean, a lot of the most important and well-known and successful political consultants have been in the business a little longer. What kind of a struggle has that been? Has it been a struggle for you to get clients to grow, since you're a younger guy who is still cutting?
That's a really great question, Brian. I appreciate you bringing that up. And honestly, it's just I'm selling something very different, right? Like So when I started my company and we were talking about the design of the logo, I said, here's what I said to the designer. I said, I don't want a chess piece. I don't want a check mark. I don't want a voting. I don't want like a little ballot box, right? I don't want to be, I'm not trying to be and I've never tried to be the Bud Light version of these Blue Blazer country club consultants, right? If you want to hire, and there's no knock against them. A lot of those guys are great guys in there, and some of them are mentors of mine and dear friends. But if you want one of those guys, go and hire one of them. My offer is not a knockoff Diet Coke version of that. I believe that the emphasis that we here put on digital, put on response time and rapid response, and quite frankly, I mean the reputation that we've built here as a firm, and let me say that, what I really want to hit home is that I have an amazing team behind me. It's 8:09 at night in Las Vegas right now, and several of my team is still working very hard here at the office. And we've done all the success we've had has come as a team, and it's not been attributable to me. It's been attributable to the team. But as a team, we've gained a reputation kind of as pit bulls, and I'm very proud of that, because you don't win a dog fight with ASPCA rules. You take a bigger and meaner dog off the leash. And we've developed, and we're never the people who are afraid to hit first, and we're never the people who are afraid to hit hard. And we've had a lot of success there. And so quite often, we will get to come back to your first question. Yeah, I mean, when we're meeting with potential clients, sometimes that's brought up. It's like, well, you've been in this business for 15 years, but here's another consultant who's been in this business for 35, and I can't compete with that. But my response to that is very simple. It's, the tools that we used 35 years ago, if you are using the tools today that were preeminent 35 years ago to win elections, you are going to lose. And I know consultants who do that, who think, that the media buy, the cable buy is the most important thing in the world. Buying broadcast, buying cable is important, but it's gone from 70% of your campaign's budget to maybe 35 or 40%. The preeminence of digital is huge. There's a lot of consultants out there who, especially on the Republican side, who don't give digital their due, quite frankly, because they don't understand it and they're not willing to learn it. What was I going to say? At one point, probably about 20 years ago, newspaper endorsements were huge, right? Having a newspaper endorsement really, really buoyed your campaign a lot. Nowadays, I'd argue they do more harm, especially to Republicans, than they do good. I can't think of a newspaper in the country that endorsed Donald Trump in 2016. So we're just selling something very different, and that's a good fit for some people. It's a bad fit for others, and I'm very honest about that. And but I think that what we've been able to do. I mean, the average age of the firm is pretty young. I think our average age is probably early 30s. what was I going to say? But it's been really great and really cool. And actually, I was the one recognized, but my team, we were just recognized as one of the top 40 consultants under 40 years old in the country by the American Association of Political Consultants. And I think that's a testament to what we've been able to do with some new strategy.
For those people who are just listening to the podcast and not watching the video version, Rory he's wearing right now, he's wearing a black polo shirt, a camouflage hat, and he's got more tattoos than almost any other Republican I know. So not the only Republican consultant who has tattoos, ironically enough. Has any candidate met with you, taken one look at you and say, no, I'm good here?
I am sure that some have thought that in the back of their mind. Now, I've never, as far as I can think, no one has ever said it. As far as I can think, no one has ever said it. But I think people know what they're getting before they call me, right? Like, typically before I go, we do business across the country, right? So like, typically for me to go meet with a candidate, I travel to meet with them, right? And like and I wear a suit from time to time when I'm on Capitol Hill or, at meetings in a state capitol or something like that. Not terribly often. So if you've reached out to meet with me, you know who I am, you know my reputation, you probably know what I look like, right? Like if you want to hire the khaki pants, blue blazer consultant, I'm nowhere on your list. You know what I mean? So, no, but I'm sure that someone has had that thought at the back of their mind at least once.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, especially given how the conservative nature of the Republican Party, not just from the political side, but from, just the culture, the internal political culture of people who are attending those kind of events, who are Republicans, who are kind of drawn to that.
Brian, one thing I'll say is I hope that we've learned our lesson, right? I mean, we ran Mitt Romney and we ran John McCain and we tried to, do this virtue signaling, play to the moderates, play to the suburbanites, play to the guys who wear the shorts with the little whales on them. I don't know what they're called. Vineyard Vines. That's what they're called. And we got our butts kicked time and time again. And then Donald Trump, for whatever you think of him, he reached out and he touched working class America. And working class America said, we feel like we've had the shit kicked out of us and we want somebody to kick ass for us. And they turned out to vote at record levels that they never have before in the history of the United States. So, look, I have a country club membership, so I'm not trying to, cast aspersions too much, but I hope as a party we've, I'm a huge fan of Lee Atwater. Lee Atwater's an idol of mine, and I've read everything there is to read on Lee Atwater. And Lee Atwater had this huge contempt. He was raised obviously in South Carolina, went to college in Newberry College, South Carolina, and he had this huge contempt for people in the North because there was this attitude of we're better than you are, we're smarter than you are, and for a long time I feel like the Republican Party was kind of governed by that crowd, by that we're better than you are and smarter than you are crowd. And that's why our voters stayed home for Mitt Romney, stayed home for Bob Dole, people who could be our voters stayed home for Mitt Romney, stayed home for Bob Dole, stayed home for John McCain. I love John McCain. I was an intern on his campaign, but they didn't turn out for him because I don't think we were speaking to them. And then we spoke to the working class, and we were successful.
You talked a little bit about your experience before, and I want to get back to that a little bit because you've had a much variety, variety of jobs that you've had, both not just in the sense of what you've done, obviously, as you've grown through the industry, but also in who you've worked for. You talked about you've worked for the RNC, you've worked for a state party, you've worked for a firm, and now you're the principal at your own firm.
In fairness, I lasted at the RNC for like 3 weeks, so let's not talk about it.
Hey, it's 3 weeks longer than some people have lasted.
Fair enough.
What's kind of is the difference that you see in working for all of those groups? Because what you're doing in, working for a candidate or trying to spread the message for the RNC is different than what you're doing as a finance director for the state party or, at working in a firm.
It's a great question, Brian. So there's two kind of career tracks in my industry, right? And career track number one is, you go manage these dog shit little races, and then you win a couple of them, and somebody trusts you with a little bit bigger race, and then maybe a little bit bigger race, and then a little bit bigger race. But you're always kind of coming from behind, and you're always kind of having to put something together with duct tape and baling wire, and you're having to prove that you can take a limited resource challenge and deliver a victory out of it. And then you do that enough, and you've gathered enough experience on how to do that. How do we raise money? How do we get attention from the press? How do we create cheap media, stuff like that? And then you start a firm, and instead of implementing it, you give advice to people to implement it, right? And then the other career track is, I was never, kind of the good son of the establishment career track, where you work as a regional victory director, and then you're like a political director, and then you're like a statewide field director, for a state party, and then you become a state party ED, then you become like a regional, and then you go to work on 2nd Street, and then, and then you get hired by a consulting firm as an SVP, a senior VP, right? And again, I'm not knocking that was not my track at all. My track was the first one. I'm not knocking the guys who've done that. But what they're used to doing is they're used to managing multi-million-dollar budgets with no experience in how to raise multi-million-dollar budgets. They're used to, deciding what to say at press conferences without ever figuring out, how do I get somebody to care about my press conference, right? So when they go talk to candidate XYZ, who's a county commissioner out of nowhere running for Congress, and they don't know how to help him raise money, and they don't know how to, build the parachute on the way out of the airplane. They don't know how to build the race car with the baling wire and the duct tape. They're woefully unprepared. So I really thoroughly enjoyed working at the Republican Party of Indiana. It's one of my favorite places that I've ever worked. I had a really great time there, but I learned far more from trying to take, C-list candidates, and I don't say C-list as people, but like people who hadn't been elected before, weren't super wealthy, and figure out, how do we build a campaign and put those in office, and the successes and failures there, I think, are what have led me to help candidates be very successful. Not my experience in, how do you go to lobbyists and, raise a bunch of money, and stuff like that.
I've noticed, working on the campaigns that I've helped out with and worked on, I've noticed that it's a lot more fun to work for those candidates who have limited resources, who may be behind the 8 ball, because they're the ones who, not only the candidates are going to work harder, but the people who are helping that candidate, whether they're getting paid or not, are also working harder. Is that something that you've seen too?
It's so true, Brian. I mean, I love teams, right? I'm a huge believer in teams, and I feel like here at my firm we have this team culture, this campaign culture, and it comes from each of us having come up on broke campaigns, right, and hard scrabble campaigns where, like, you can't afford a manager and a political director and a comms director and a coalitions director and a deputy political director, right? You got like 3 guys who are putting in their all, and one of the guys isn't even getting paid, and you're sleeping on the floor of the campaign office, and you're just building this incredible bond. Teddy Roosevelt said, what makes life worth living is to work hard at work worth doing, right? And I would caveat that with people that you love and care about, right? And those teams that you build and those bonds that you forge on those campaigns are incredible, and I enjoy them far, far more.
So let's talk about again your time in Indiana. One of the things that candidates always seem, particularly candidates who have never run before, candidates who have never been elected to office before, seem reticent to do is to pick up the phone and make the call to raise money. And I think we all understand that it's hard to get on the phone to ask people for money. You were in Indiana. That was your job. That is literally what you were paid to do.
Yes,
how do people make that ask?
Let me caveat it with this. That's true, but let me caveat it with this. When I was in Indiana, I was finance director of the state Republican Party. Mike Pence was the governor. We controlled the governor's office, every single statewide elected official, and had the overwhelming majority of the congressional delegation. And we had super majorities in both of the legislative chambers. So my job was to go between the Columbia Country Club, Harry and Izzy's, and St. Elmo's Steakhouse, and do dinners with lobbyists and wealthy donors, and say, hey man, what more do you want? Write another, so it was really not that hard of a fundraising job. Yes, but my candidates, I've raised millions and millions of dollars for Republican candidates, or helped Republican candidates raise millions and millions of dollars. That is 20 hours a week on the phone, calling numbers off a sheet, begging, pleading, and supplicating for money. So we also saw the video with Kim Klacik this week, right? And an incredible ad. Great job by her and her team. And it was retweeted by the president. She raised $1.5 million overnight, and that's wonderful news. But I almost hate it when things like that happen because, and let me explain why. Roughly in a given year, 5,000 people run for office, right? And the amount of times that there's a Kim Klacik-esque experience, right? Like Kim Klacik, Lauren Boebert, on the Democratic side, Ocasio-Cortez, Cori Bush in Missouri. It's like 4 or 5 out of 5,000, right, successfully go viral and get crowdfunded. So what that does is all of these candidates then think, well, I can run for office. And I'm not saying that I don't know if she does or not, but I'm not saying that Kim doesn't also work hard at traditional fundraising. She very well may do that. But when something like what that happens is all these candidates start thinking like, well, I'm just going to go viral. Well, the other 4,995 people tried that too, and they didn't. The definition of viral is that it can't be controlled, right? The definition of viral is that it cannot be made predictable or repeatable. So quite truthfully, if you're not in a position to self-finance or willing to turn yourself into a professional telemarketer, you're probably not going to win.
In your opinion, and I'm just asking your opinion here. You mentioned the Kim Klacik ad. Mm-hmm. She raised a lot of money, and that's great for her. That's a lot of national money that's being diverted from close races to a race where in the special election she lost by 48%, I think it was.
I disagree with that.
Does that frustrate you?
No, it doesn't. Though, nothing ventured, nothing gained, right? Like it was a ballsy ad and she deserves the money. And it wasn't transfers of hundreds of thousands of dollars from national committees. It was people who sat at home and saw the ad and said, hell, that's ballsy as hell. She's running in Baltimore. I'm going to send her $10. That's money that would not have existed otherwise, right? They weren't going to donate to a Mitt Romney-esque candidate, right? Like that wasn't going to happen. No, I applaud. It was a great video. It was a great ad. It was ballsy as hell. I applaud the hell out of it. My only concern is then in the next cycle, right, when some candidate who wants to run for Congress says, well, I don't need to do my fundraising calls, I just need to go viral, and then spends a year of their life trying to go viral and never succeed.
Okay. That's a fair point. Let's talk about kind of your process, okay? Sure. You have become very successful very quickly. What is the process from kind of to start meeting a candidate? Because, when you're talking about not just, when a candidate goes out to hire a consultant, the consultant's also hiring the candidate. Sure. You're hitching your professional reputation to this candidate. Mm-hmm. How does that process work, and what are you looking for in a candidate before you agree to work with them?
So, a very good question. Most typically, occasionally there is, I wouldn't say occasionally, I'd say maybe 40-ish% of our candidates call me based on a referral of someone else, right? And then I'll spend some time on the phone with them and see if I get to like them. Most often what happens, because we are a larger firm, is we have an associate at our firm whose full-time job is to look for candidates that kind of meet our requirements and our ethos and see if they'd be people we're interested in working with, right? So typically, he'll talk to them on the phone, and if he likes them and gets a good feel from them, and we have a list of things that like are disqualifying, right? I'm not going to ask my family and friends for money. Out. There's a physical list. There's a whole number of things on that list, but that's one of the top ones. So then after he has a chance to chat with them, if he likes it, then typically they'll chat with one of the senior strategists at my firm, either Ryan Neal or Woodrow Johnston. And Ryan and Woodrow both run a number of successful campaigns, and they're kind of able to dive much deeper in and see, okay, is this someone really who might have the mettle for a race, right? And after that's done, and Ryan or Woodrow, whoever talks to them, report back to me like, yeah, we really think this is a potential good opportunity here, then that I'll get on the phone with them and spend some time on it. And by that point, I've kind of qualified that they're a potentially serious candidate. I'm just looking to see if we get along and if there's somebody that I think I can work with. But to talk, just because I think this is more to the nature of your question, what Ryan and Woodrow are looking for is, are they prepared to not try to run the ship themselves, right? Do they have a core set of values that align with our own, right? Is this person someone who could marshal the resources to make a successful run for office? Is this someone that will work well with our team? Right. So after those kind of things are established, I'm talking to them to see if I like them, if I agree with them, if I think we're going to work well together. Because inevitably, what happens in every campaign is there becomes a moment where the candidate has to choose to trust the consultant, right, and go against their better judgment. And here's most often the example: you launch a negative ad. Everybody comes to you and says, "Oh my God, I can't believe you're going negative. My friend at work told me he won't vote for you because you went negative." And then the candidate comes to you and says, "I'm so worried that this negative ad is hurting us." And I have to turn to the candidate and say, I have done literally hundreds of campaigns, and I promise you that this ad is working, right? And if someone tells you it's too ad negative, we need to be spending more on it. And at that moment, the candidate has to choose to trust you over maybe their spouse, their coworkers, their friends. So what I'm trying to assess is this someone that I can build that level of trust with, or they're willing to trust me over the echo chamber that they live in, that they don't realize they live in. And then if I assess that that's a yes, then typically I get on a plane and I go meet with them. Occasionally, we're lucky to have an office in Las Vegas. We actually have a candidate flying in on Tuesday from Louisiana to meet with us. Sometimes people want to come out here, which is great because then I don't have to travel. But either I'll meet with them out here or I'll go out and meet with them. And by that point, normally the meeting is talking about, okay, how do we start this thing and how do we get off the ground? But that is kind of the process from, we read that somebody's going to run it for something to, they've become a client.
So once they become a client, how often, usually what kind of lead time do you have when you sign on to somebody's campaign? I mean, are we talking about 6 months, a year, 2 years?
I'm not
election day.
Rephrase your question a little bit, Brian. What do you mean lead time?
So from the time that, how often or how early in the process do these candidates come to you to sign on?
So early, actually, we already have a client signed for 2022.
Okay.
Actually, not one or two. And right now our role is much smaller, right? Our role is let's look at the potential donors that you should form relationships with. Let's look at the potential endorsers you should form relationships with. Here are the things you should do to set yourself up in the right direction. Typically, 18 months is a good window, right? If somebody becomes my client in, say, March of an off year with the goal of running for office. So if you're going to run for office in 2022, I can be the most effective for you if I start working with you, no later than June of 2021. I prefer March-ish, something like that.
What levels of office are you assisting with people with right now? I mean, you have U.S. Senate, you've got state legislature, you've got Congress signed on your wall behind you.
Yep.
Is there any level that's just kind of too small of a political level for you to sign on for?
No, but the arrangement looks much different, right? So typically, we've won primaries we won races this year, everything from the surprise Arizona City Council to U.S. Congress, and kind of everywhere in between, right? And the arrangement looks much different if at a local city council race. What that is we'll probably do an initial meeting, and I'll put together a memo that will kind of cover, okay, this is what you do between here and 90 days out from the election, right? You raise money. How do you raise money? You meet with voters. How do you meet with voters? How do you walk? How do you get palm cards? What events should you go to? How often should you go to events? The secret is not very often. And that and it'll kind of be like a one-time fee, one-time meeting to kind of, and then I never charge anyone to call me on the phone and pick my brain for a few minutes, and I'll return their call as soon as I can. Sometimes that's a day or two, but as soon as I can. So then we'll kind of do, and I'll write a memo concluding what we've talked about, which is kind of their guidepost, for 9 months or whatever the case may be. And then we'll get together and we'll reassess, okay, this is how much money we've raised. And the most effective thing to do here would be, we're going to do a poll. We're going to do 3 mail pieces. We're going to do some digital ads. We're going to do some text and some robo, right? So instead of paying us a monthly fee, because that doesn't make sense in a race where you're only going to spend $20,000 for the whole race. It's instead of that, it's we hit some guideposts and kind of make sure we're helping steer the ship, but we don't want half of their campaign budget to be paid to us in fees.
Do you ever think the firm would either get to a level where you can support a presidential campaign, or do you think you're already at that level, and would you?
So typically a presidential campaign is handled in a series of ways, right? So you have, you very rarely, if ever, and I can't think of a circumstance where this has happened, does one firm take on an entire presidential, where that's the one-stop shop for the presidential campaign. Typically what happens is someone will come to me or a firm like mine, and they'll say, all right, Rory, we want you to run this region of the country for this presidential campaign, right? We want you to run these 5 states. We are in some talks already. I am reasonably confident that we will be working with a presidential candidate in 2024.
For everybody who doesn't think the 2024 primary has already started.
Yes, we have already been contacted by some interested parties to ask if we would be interested in leading one of the national regions for one of the presidential candidates. So obviously nothing's signed, nothing's come to fruition yet, but we'll see. And then those individuals who serve at the national level of the campaign as manager, political director, senior strategist, typically those individuals are expected to resign from their consulting firms or take a hiatus, right? So the people who make up the high command nationally typically take a hiatus from their firms and their other clients. So if that were something I were to do, which is I don't think something I'm interested in 2024, but I don't know, then I would take a leave of absence from the firm. Either our managing director, Ed Williams, or one of our senior strategists would step up and run the firm for the cycle, and I would go dedicate all my energies to that campaign. But if we took on kind of a regional role where we're overseeing the campaign for 4 or 5 states, then I definitely think we're there, and I think we will be doing it in the next cycle.
So definitely not a Sherman-esque statement there that you would never step down temporarily to run a national campaign.
No, I absolutely would be willing to, but it'd have to be, it would be I don't mean to say this arrogantly, but it would be a serious pay cut, right? Now, of course, the boon of it is if you're successful, you triple, quadruple, quintuple your business. So, it's much to be gained, but it would be a serious pay cut. I already travel a lot. I'm typically on the road about a third of the time. So it would be more time on the road away from my son. So there would be a lot that would make me think about it. But if I found a candidate that I really believed had the ability to, and the fortitude to, and the competence to drive America into the next decade, and quite frankly, fight back against the end of Western civilization, then yeah, I would do it.
You mentioned the travel. Obviously, the pandemic has impacted your ability to travel and to see your clients face to face. I know that you're traveling again now. Mm-hmm. How much did that inability to travel hurt your business, for one thing, but also the ability to help your candidates?
That's a great question. I wouldn't say that I was expecting it to hurt business much more than it did. We did see a minor dip in revenue over a couple of months, but really it's not been that bad. And we have as a company done already twice as much business at this point in 2020 as we did in the entirety of 2018. So that's been very cool. What was I going to say? We started doing some new things. So we have a couple of candidates that I'm very proud of that I've actually never met in person. And that's something I never would have done prior to COVID. But, Maya Espinoza, she's the Republican nominee. She just won a great primary, did a terrific job for state superintendent in Washington State. Really the biggest pickup opportunity Republicans have in that state. Her and I have actually never met in person. We talk all the time. And prior to COVID, I would have never signed a race like that without meeting the candidate in person. I would say it has minorly hindered my ability to assist my clients. I really do always prefer being in a room over a conference call. So we've had to kind of get used to long Zoom meetings and stuff like that. But I think being in a room together is always preferable when possible. And I'm looking forward to that hopefully being par for the course again in the next cycle.
So we talked earlier about kind of how you get to the point where you've signed on with a client and you guys have created that business relationship. Mm-hmm. Without giving away any state secrets, obviously, we don't want to, give away the everything here. Generally, what are kind of the next steps and how you build that forward, kind of going from the signed contract towards election day?
So we have a lot of very in-depth interview process that we go through with the candidates, talking about their policy positions, their opinions, their background, their history, if there's anything we need to watch out for. And then we help them put the building blocks in place. Let's get together a list of people that that would be willing to write a check to you. Let's start kind of building a messaging box and figure out what the key things we're going to talk about are, prior to polling and just, who you are and how we're going to introduce you to voters. And then there's kind of the, all of the things that you have to do to have a functional campaign, a website, a launch video. Then really the next task is fundraising and gathering support. Let's build a list of people that you need to call and ask for their support and ask for their times to meet. And then let's build a list of potential donors for you to call. And typically my staff will either train them or even sit on calls with them while they're doing their donor calls to start raising money. So that's, and then, we'll build them a plan, and the campaign plan will be broken down with monthly and weekly goals, so we can assess. And this is a big mistake campaigns make. They mistake motion for progress, right? And we want to make sure our campaigns are always making progress. So what we'll do is have regular calls with them after we've kind of put the train on the track to make sure that we're making positive downfield motion and not just progress.
So we talked a little bit, we mentioned COVID in the sense of how it's hurt, business and meeting with clients. How has COVID at this point, if at all, changed kind of how you approach campaigns, given the fact that, large gatherings are not necessarily on the table, that people may be skittish about either going door or answering doors? So
I gave an interview to the Review Journal about this, and I got some pushback from it. But I don't give a fuck, so I'll say it again. The biggest problem with candidates, and weirdly, I see this in Maryland more than anywhere else, just because I don't think there's a lot of remaining political talent in Maryland. There are a few guys in Maryland who I think do a great job, who I work very closely with, Justin Reedy, Lawrence Scott, those guys. But there's not a ton of political talent in Maryland, so you have a lot of rudderless candidates. And they spend their entire time going from young Republicans to Republican women to Republican Tea Party to Republican Liberty to Republican Central Committee, and they talk to the same 10 people at every meeting, and it helps them do nothing. And it's useless, and it's a waste of time. Like, you have to go to those groups one time, because in those groups you may meet a handful of people who get really excited about your campaign and want to volunteer. What you're going to run into a lot more of is slacktivists who will want to give you a lot of advice, and you say, that's awesome, could you help me door knock? Oh no, I don't do that. But you may meet a dozen people who really get excited, and they are the workers in our party, and the level of love and appreciation and respect I have for the people who knock doors and plant lawn signs and make phone calls is like otherworldly, right? I mean, those guys just tier 1 A-class people. But the people who like, you know, have a lot of opinions but won't help you knock doors, like to this day, I do my absolute best to, before a big primary day, if I ever can, to get out and, like, if I have a client within driving distance, to go put up signs at polling places with clients, right? Because, like, I hate the idea that I'm going to tell you to do something that I'm not willing to do. Sometimes I can do it, sometimes I don't, but I try and at least do it a couple of times a year. Or do one afternoon making phone calls with a candidate, making phone calls to voters for a candidate or something like that. But, sorry, I went off on a tirade there, but what COVID did was it eliminated a lot of those gatherings or moved a lot of them to Zoom. So that gave candidates more time to do things that actually win votes, calling donors, calling voters. So I think from a campaign perspective, it kind of brushed away a lot of the time waster events for candidates.
Has it changed or brought any concern with actual get out the vote strategies between the changing goalposts, as we saw, particularly in the primary of elections, going to all mail elections, concerns about the more prevalence of absentee? I mean, obviously, I know your candidates are prepared. They already had a get out the vote plan to absentee ballot plan. Has it changed your calculus any insofar as we don't know how many people are going to choose absentee vis-a-vis get out, voting in person?
That is a great observation, Brian. And I try my best to admit when I am wrong. And COVID and, coupled with the presidential primary and the beginning of mail balloting in a lot of these states, the turnout equation, the turnout makeups were things wildly different than we've ever seen. So in a lot of states, we saw half of habitual Republican primary voters, people who voted 3 or 4 of the last 4 Republican primaries, didn't vote at all. They never filled in their mail-in ballot. And about 1/4 of votes came from people who had never voted in a Republican primary before. And then about another 1/4 of votes came from low propensity voters. So forever, the rule in the business was, if you vote in primaries, you vote in primaries. If you don't, you don't. That's it. But we saw this incredibly new makeup of voters, and luckily here at my shop, we had some great guys working on parsing out the data. So as that was happening and ballots were being returned, we could read that trend, compare it to where our candidates were polling with each of those affinity groups. So we had one candidate who was polling second place with high propensity voters, second place with no propensity voters, right? Never voted in primary, but he was leading pretty well among the low propensities, the ones in the 2s. So we turned our whole operation into getting out low propensity Republican voters because we knew he was winning those guys by 10-15%. Then he just took away a great primary victory, won his primary by about 7%. Because we were analyzing that data as it was going, but COVID has completely, in states that opted to mail balloting, which is most, completely changed the makeup of who your voters are.
How hard is it to change a strategy on the fly like that?
Extremely. It requires more work for no more money, right? Like, my retainer doesn't change if we put in the hour. I mean, I remember actually that particular congressional race, we were all sitting in my living room at or I say all of us, like the senior team was sitting in my living room at 2 a.m, and we were casting on my 85-inch television the inverse relationship between someone's propensity to support the candidate and their propensity to vote, right? So we rewrote the whole budget at 2 o'clock in the morning. It didn't make us any more money to do that, but we came away with a great victory that a lot of people didn't expect. And, that will lead to more clientele and stuff like that. So it is hard to do. And you have to know what you're doing to do it. But doing it means you win. To give a shout out for a minute, one of the most impactful moments of my career, 15 years ago, I was having coffee with Lawrence Scott, and I always will have a lot of appreciation for him because he's one of the guys who made time for me when I was a young teenager, didn't know anything, wanted to be a political guy, And Lawrence was telling me how he dissected the new registered voter file, and he found these clumps of voter registrations. And then what he found is the people who'd registered in clumps were less likely to turn out to vote than the people who'd registered incrementally in the year. The reason being is the people who registered in clumps were people who'd registered at like a high school civics class or something like that. They all registered at the same time as they were expected to. The people who registered periodically were people who teenagers who actually wanted to vote and participate in elections. So if you have a candidate who is budget challenged and you need to cut out new regis, you cut out the clump, not the periodic registrants. And I remember thinking about the time and energy it must have taken him to discern that pattern, but how many races his clients probably won because of it and not even knowing that had happened.
Between like now and election day, talk about the last 45, 50 days prior
70, to 71 right now, I think.
Well, by the time this airs, it'll be about 45 to 50 or so. How chaotic is your life?
So in the last, let's see. So I'm just trying to think here. Last 10 days, I flew to Austin, drove to San Antonio, drove to Dallas, flew home to Las Vegas for 36 hours, flew to Omaha, Nebraska, drove to Leicester, Iowa, drove back to Omaha, Nebraska, flew back to Las Vegas, flew to San Antonio, flew back to Las Vegas. I'm here now. I fly to Dallas on Wednesday, Austin on Tuesday, DC sometime. In addition to actually running the campaign. So it's 8 o'clock. It's almost 9 o'clock now, and I'm still in my office. I try to maintain some family time. So I took my son to the park this morning. We're taking him swimming tomorrow morning, and then I'll be back in the office tomorrow afternoon and evening. Quite a bit. Me and my senior staff know that, probably around September 15th, we will just all have cots in the office.
Wow. What is the most interesting candidate you've ever worked for? I know that for people who are watching the video, the one that catches my eye, of course, is the late Dennis Hoff, who owned the Bunny Ranch up in Nevada. Won that race, race that actually got a lot of national attention. I know he passed away before he was able to take office, but what's the most interesting, fascinating race?
Dennis was not that interesting or fascinating just because in all of my dealings with him, he was the most professional. I never heard him use a vulgar word, never heard him say anything sexual or degrading about women. He was just an incredibly professional guy, nice guy. One time we were doing a last minute ad buy and the check wasn't going to arrive in time, right, to pay for the ad buy. And he calls me and he says, well, look, I've got the check ready for you. Why don't you just drive on up to the ranch and the Bunny Ranch, the brothel, and get the check? And I say, Dennis, I'll trust you for it. Just pop it in the mail, man. So he was, that was on the list. I talked about the race in Washington State earlier. I'm really excited about that. A pickup opportunity in a state where we don't have a lot of pickup opportunities. I'll tell you another race I'm really excited about. Christy Jacobson in Montana. Christy, she just won her primary. She's never run for office before. Won her primary against the president of the state Senate and the former Speaker of the House, one of the most powerful politicians in Montana, and really just won a very, very convincing primary. And she's going to be a great Secretary of State if she gets elected. So I'm super stoked about that. Got a great congressional race in Nevada. I'm trying to think most interesting ever. One of the most, I always go back. The last race I managed on a day-to-day basis was Scott Gessler's campaign for governor of Colorado. And I have it framed in my office. Westward Magazine nicknamed Scott Gessler the Honey Badger. And they published an article, a front page article, Honey Badger don't give a shit. And that became the rallying cry of our campaign. Honey Badger don't give a shit. And and they tried everything they could to stop Scott. They hauled him, and ultimately were successful in that. They hauled him in front of the Ethics Commission, and they, demanded he admit that he was secretly funneling off money from his $1,200 expense account, that he was secretly somehow getting rich on it. And his response to all of them was, I love that guy so much in his campaign. And there's a story I'll always remember. We were driving to, I'm trying to remember the name of the town. way out on the Colorado-Nebraska border. It'll come to me in just a minute. It's past Julesburg, past Sterling, middle of nowhere. And Scott's telling me, we're talking about how these towns have had these droughts, right? And the droughts are killing the agriculture, and the agriculture is killing the town. So all the kids are leaving the town, and most of them can't afford to go to Denver, so they're leaving the state. And Scott's telling me about how he's been up late at night researching this stuff, right? And new irrigation methods to bring these towns back online. And this is a guy who's a partner at a very successful law firm, Hackstaff Gessler. He's a graduate of Yale, Michigan, and Northwestern universities. I doubt he has set his foot on a farm since that day, right? Like no personal interest in agriculture other than to help people. And he was spending his nights staying up late, not getting sleep to research irrigation to help people. And in that moment, driving in that car out to Julesburg, Colorado, I so deeply knew that I was working for the right candidate, right? And that's a guy that that makes you want to fight for him. And that was a great race, and that was one of my favorite races. One of the races that we worked our asses off, and I'm most proud of.
Yeah, it's always nice when you're getting involved with a candidate who's actually in it for all the right reasons. It's much more satisfying.
Here's the truth. Most of them are. Very rarely do I run across a candidate who's like, I want to go to Congress for the retirement plan. I've definitely run across one or two of them, but most of the time they're getting involved for the right reasons. Look, plenty of people have asked me over the years how I sleep at night. And, I make a living in, political attack ads, political knife fights. And because, losers don't legislate, right? Like, you can run a campaign with Marcus of Queensberry rules all you want and toast yourself at your happy hour, but you're not going to win. And you're probably going to get, the mud beaten out of you in the process. And I'm incredibly proud to be the tip of the spear for my people, for our ideology, for our side.
You brought up several, we talked a little bit about some state legislative and some state races in there too. One of the things that has been both a boon to politics and culture and a detriment, of course, is social media, particularly Facebook. And we all see the Facebook warriors out there who are 100% focused on federal politics.
Yep.
How hard is that for you as a consultant to break through to those folks to say, hey, this statewide race, this local race is important because I have been beating my head against a wall for this for a decade and I can't get through. You're trying to reach that voter and try to get them to actually do something.
So just so I'm clear, are you talking about the candidate who's spending all their time on Facebook instead of out walking doors? Or are you talking about the activist who's spending all their time making Facebook comments instead of, out walking doors for their local candidate?
Well, and they're both fair questions. So let's start with the activists.
I generally think that I think that you owe them an explanation as to why what you're asking them. Let me back up here because I want to be fair to them to a certain extent, right? One, you have to be asked to volunteer, to do something. Just, a candidate who puts his post on Facebook, everyone come door knock with me this Saturday, and doesn't get any volunteers. Like, I don't feel bad for that guy. You as the candidate or your staff when I worked on the for the RNC on the Romney campaign, our office made something like 700 volunteer recruitment calls a day, right? I had 2 employees under me or something like that. And if you don't pick up the phone and say, hey Bob, I'm doing a door knock this Saturday. I know you support me. Could you come help us out with the door knock? I don't blame anybody for not then going and door knocking for you. And secondly, you have to explain to them why what they're doing matters, right? We all live in an echo chamber and we need to reach people outside of that echo chamber. So we got to go to their houses directly, that sort of stuff. What was I going to say? But then if they're, if kind of after A and B, all they're going to do is sit on Facebook and make comments, they're never going to be a volunteer in the first place, right? Like I remember 2012, and there was a guy came into the office and wanted a bunch of yard signs, and we said, well, sir, the limit is one per sign, but if you'd actually be willing to volunteer, we could waive that and give you some more. And he goes, well, I don't do that stuff. I like to spend time with my friends and family. I'm like, well, so do the rest of us here, but we want to win too. We want to save the country. So that's one, right? That's one. You have to show the activist respect. You have to ask them. It's a serious amount of time, right? I mean, most of these people have careers. If they're a lawyer or a dentist, they charge hundreds of dollars an hour for their time. So you have to make a serious, straightforward ask for help if you want them to come give their time to you for free. You have to treat them with respect and friendship and camaraderie, and explain to them why what they're doing matters. And if you've done all those things, a lot of people will volunteer for you. But the people who will just continually find an excuse to blog or make comments or knock doors or not knock doors, like they're never going, they're never going to be helpful. To the candidate, so I teach the campaign management class and the future candidate class at the Leadership Institute. And the last slide of my deck is, is rules for social media, right? And rule one is you are not Donald Trump. You are not going to win this election on Twitter. Donald Trump started his campaign with 100% name ID and $65 million. So whenever a candidate calls in and talks to my staff and says, I'm going to win like Trump did on Twitter or on social media, they're instructed to say, that's great. How many of your own million will you be putting in? And which #1 television show were you the host of for 10 years? 2, a vote has never been won by a Twitter war. 3, more followers does not mean more voters.
So what about the people like, for example, I'm going to pick on Robin Ficker here.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody a lot of people know Robin Ficker. If you're not from here, from Maryland, Robin Ficker, most famously known as the heckler at NBA games, is a former elected official and a perennial candidate for office. He's running for governor of Maryland right now. Mm-hmm. And every weekend for at least 7 or 8 weeks, he's been down in Ocean City taking his picture with people while wearing a fanny pack on the boardwalk. And you can't go 3 feet on Facebook, and I use, obviously it's a metaphor, without seeing a Robin Ficker picture with somebody who looks like God love them, they look like they're in a hostage situation. How do you beat the candidate's head in and say, look, man, you gotta get off of this and actually do something to try to win?
So I'm going to give some props to Robin Ficker, because Robin Ficker runs an initiative or both every 2 years, and he's done it for the last 40 years.
Yeah, the man never quits, and I give him 100% props for that.
Hold on. And everyone laughs at him. But if you look backwards, about every 10 years, he ekes out a victory, right? He won a legislative office a couple of times. A couple of his ballot measures have been successful. Right. So as much as everyone wants to laugh at the guy, about every 10 years, he comes back with a victory. And 2, I literally, last week, got a handwritten donation request letter from Robin Ficker. I did not send back money, because it's very rare that I donate to candidates, but I probably passingly gave Robin a business card at a Red Maryland event sometime or something. Right. And the fact that he's collated them and sending out that is what you should do right now to a Robin candidate, and I don't, outside of a passing conversation, I don't know if I've ever spoken to Robin. So I don't know what he would say in this, but you make the argument, you clearly lay out why this is not successful, right? You're engaging with an echo chamber of people who already agree with you, blah, 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 blah. And then if they're not willing to hear it at that point, and they're just like, I know what to do, I'm great, cool, man, have a great time. One of the things that's been hardest for me is when I was I've never been a one-man shop, but I had me and one part-time assistant, right? I only had 4 or 5 clients, and they were all people that I would push really, really hard because I wanted them to win. And I was very selective in my clientele because I only needed 4 or 5 clients. We've got 10 full-time employees. We have a large payroll, right? Not every client is going to, and now my rule is I give my advice strongly one time. And if you don't want to listen to it, that's your prerogative.
One of the interesting things you mentioned there too, you talk about your payroll. You're a guy who came up through the ranks, as a political operative, and you're now running your own firm. So you have to balance your actual job with all of the administrative responsibilities of owning a company and making sure people get paid. How much of a pain in the ass is that?
So I'm very lucky. A gentleman joined us about 2 years ago as initially our digital director. And he had been, and worn a number of hats in his career. He'd been chairman of a county party. He'd managed a congressional race for fun. And then, come to find out, he had really, built a very successful web development business, before kind of taking up politics as a second career. And we've been able to work together very, very well. And so he's recently moved from digital director to managing director of the firm. And he helps with a lot of the, the business decisions, the HR, the hiring, the firing, bonus programs, scalability, stuff like that. Because truth be told, I mean, I'm a manager, I'm a strategist at my core, and I will spend all day, every day working on one inane victory, right? And lose the forest through the trees that, 10 people and their families to count on me for compensation, right? For food. So it is a pain in the ass, but I wouldn't get to work with the team that I do if I didn't. And I am absolutely better than, so we did some math the other day. It's really interesting. So when I go meet with, about how often do we meet with a candidate, and want to sign them and successfully sign them, right? Because there's, if you're a candidate worth having, right? Let's say a candidate who can raise or spend more than $500,000 in the entire country, there's probably only 1,000 of those candidates available, right? And there's 300 consultants and firms trying to get that business, right? And I'd probably say there's probably only 500 of those candidates available, right? So maybe even not that many. So if we meet someone and want to sign them as a firm, how often are we successful at that, right? So we did some math. If I meet with them individually, we sign them as a client 53% of the time. If myself and one of our senior strategists meet with them together, we sign them 67% of the time. If myself, our managing director, someone from the creative department, and one of our senior strategists all meet with them, we sign them 83% of the time. Our whole is greater than the sum of our parts, right? As a team, we are better than each of us individually in our best moments. I'm honored to be the leader of the team, but the team is far and away better than me. And if I wasn't willing to deal with the administrative taxes, payroll, accountants, HR, whatever, then I wouldn't get to work with the team I do.
One last question before we get you out of here. 10 years ago, digital was not the big thing it was today in politics. And actually very few people could see forward enough to see that things like social media, digital ads were going to be big in politics. And of course, it turned out as soon as, we had seen a little bit of that during the Obama election in 2008, but, it really kind of exploded in 2012.
Right.
What type of changes to the political communications, political strategy, campaign environment are going to be prevalent in 10 years that those of us who might be civilians who are not working in the day-to-day business missing out on and not seeing yet?
That's a great question, Brian. So everything is becoming more and more about data, right? And modeling and micro-targeting. So campaigns used to be about, let's figure out what issue the voters care about, generally what they want to hear on those issues, and let's run some TV ads on those issues, right? And God, that must have been an easy way to make money because that's like 3 hours of work, right? So envious of those people. Now it's about, okay, what are the 6 different things that move these people to vote? Let's subdivide the voter file, build a voter contact plan for each of these groups, and launch targeted ads at each of these people. Digital allows you to target those people individually. That's something that we couldn't do a decade and a half ago, right? So really the prevalence of campaign, what's changing in campaigns is it's not this baseball bat approach to let's buy the biggest TV ad buy we can and just shove the message down their throats. It's what makes Brian Griffiths vote for a candidate. It's probably different than what makes Rory McShane vote for a candidate, but we're both potential voters in a Republican primary. We're both potential voters in a general election, right? But you probably need to talk to us a little bit differently. and using data to discern how you talk to us differently, and then using digital mail, direct voter contact to in fact talk to us differently from the same platform is what's changing.
Well, Rory, you have been extremely generous with your time with us here on this week's episode of the Duckpin Podcast. If people want to reach out to you, if they're a potential candidate for office, they want to know more and get in contact with you, what's the best way to do that?
Email's always best, rkm@McShane LLC.com. McShane LLC.com. They're welcome to call me on my cell phone, 240-753-8120.
Rory McShane, he's the principal of McShane LLC, a very successful consulting firm out in Las Vegas. Somebody I am very proud to have seen go from a small-time activist to a very successful consultant. Rory, it's always good to talk to you, buddy, and I look forward to seeing you again in person.
Hey, Brian, thanks, my friend. Look forward to seeing you soon.
Thanks a lot. I want to thank my good friend Rory McShane for joining me in this week's episode of the Duckpin Podcast. Please subscribe to the Duckpin Podcast. You found us here on YouTube. Please click that subscribe button. If you want to join us on the audio version, just click the Duckpin Podcast in your favorite podcast catcher so that you can download automatically episodes of each and every episode of the Duckpin Podcast. And please visit us, theduckpin.com, for our main site for all the great things all of our contributors over at the Duckpin are writing and reporting on during this time period. Thanks, everybody, for watching and for listening. I'm Brian Griffiths. Thanks for listening to the Duckpin, and good night.
This has been the Duckpin Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and download